For nearly 50 years, a spacecraft has been moving farther into darkness than anything humanity has ever sent before. Voyager 1 passed the giant planets, crossed the fading boundary of the Sun's influence, and entered a region where almost nothing familiar remains. Most people assumed its final chapter would be quiet. A slow decline. Fading signals. And eventually, silence. But that expectation may have been wrong. Instead of a simple shutdown, Voyager 1 transmitted something unusual. The data didn't just look weak or degraded. It looked fractured, unstable, almost as if the signal itself had lost coherence. At first, engineers treated it as damage. After all, deep space is harsh, and aging systems fail. But this signal didn't behave like ordinary failure. Inside the apparent noise, patterns began to appear. Not obvious ones. Subtle structures. Repeating intervals. Mathematical spacing that didn't match random interference. It was the kind of anomaly that forces a second look. That's when a new kind of analysis entered the picture. Using advanced computational techniques inspired by quantum systems, researchers began re-examining the transmission. Instead of filtering out the noise, they treated it as something meaningful, as if the chaos itself might contain hidden order. And slowly, something unexpected emerged. Sequences based on prime numbers. Layered structures. Relationships that appeared intentional rather than accidental. These weren't features typically produced by a spacecraft launched in the 1970s. That changed the entire interpretation. Because Voyager 1 isn't capable of inventing new symbolic systems. It cannot generate evolving mathematical frameworks. Its design is fixed, simple by modern standards. So the question became unavoidable. If the structure wasn't created by Voyager, where did it come from? One possibility is still grounded in known science. Complex noise can sometimes create the illusion of patterns, a phenomenon known as apophenia. But the deeper the analysis went, the harder it became to dismiss everything as coincidence. The signal didn't just contain repetition. It appeared to evolve. Simple numerical relationships seemed to transition into more complex arrangements, almost like a progression. As if the structure was building upward, from basic math towards something more abstract. That's not how random noise behaves. And that's where the story becomes unsettling. Because another interpretation begins to form. What if the transmission wasn't just corrupted, but altered? Voyager 1 is now traveling through interstellar space, a region we are only beginning to understand. It has crossed boundaries where magnetic fields shift, particle densities change, and unknown conditions exist. If, in that vast environment, the probe encountered something unexpected, something capable of interacting with electromagnetic signals, then its transmission could, in theory, have been modified. Not destroyed. Not blocked. But used. In that scenario, Voyager wouldn't be the creator of the message. It would be the carrier. Like an echo that returns change. What makes this idea even more intriguing is how the structure reveals itself. The deeper layers of the pattern only became visible under more advanced analysis. It's almost as if the signal requires a certain level of technological capability to be understood. That raises a strange possibility. What if the message, if it is a message, was never meant to be immediately decoded? What if it was meant to wait? Voyager launched in 1977. At that time, humanity had no tools capable of analyzing data at this level. Only decades later have we developed systems powerful enough to detect subtle relationships buried inside complex signals. If the structure depends on that level of analysis, then its timing feels deliberate. Not proven. Not confirmed. But difficult to ignore. Another detail adds to the mystery. The structure doesn't just repeat, it unfolds. Instead of presenting everything at once, the pattern appears in layers. First simple, then more complex. As if the signal is revealing itself step by step. That's not typical behavior for natural interference. It resembles something else entirely, a system designed to be discovered gradually. If that interpretation is correct, then the meaning of Voyager 1's journey changes completely. It would no longer be just a probe exploring the unknown. It would be part of an interaction. Not necessarily with intent. Not necessarily with intelligence as we understand it. But with something capable of influencing the signal itself. And that leads to a final, unsettling thought. What if the signal is not just information, but a kind of test? A structure that only becomes visible once a civilization reaches a certain level of technological development. A threshold that must be crossed before the message reveals itself. If so, then decoding the signal wouldn't just be a scientific achievement. It would be a milestone. For decades, Voyager 1 has represented humanity's attempt to reach beyond its limits. A machine carrying our curiosity into the unknown. But if its final transmission contains something more than damaged data, then its legacy may be far more profound. It may be the first time something from beyond our familiar boundaries has been brought back, not intentionally, but undeniably. And that leaves us with one question. Not whether the signal is strange, but whether we are ready to understand it. If the signal truly contains structure, then the next question is unavoidable. What does it actually mean? At first, researchers focused only on confirming whether the patterns were real. But once that threshold was crossed, the focus shifted from detection to interpretation. And that's where things became even more disturbing. Because the deeper layers of the transmission didn't just contain mathematical sequences. They appeared to encode relationships, ratios, constants, and symbolic variations that didn't match any known communication system used by NASA or built into Voyager 1. It wasn't just unfamiliar. It was inconsistent with anything human-made. Some segments hinted at modified physical constants, values that were close to known measurements, but slightly shifted. Not random. Not chaotic. Just different. And that detail changes everything. Because constants are not something machines invent casually. They describe the structure of reality itself. If those values were intentionally altered inside the signal, then the transmission might not just be communicating data, it might be presenting an alternative framework. A different way to describe the universe. At this point, the idea of simple interference becomes harder to defend. Noise doesn't simulate structure deviation. It doesn't create near-correct versions of fundamental values. So researchers considered a more complex possibility. What if the signal wasn't meant to be read all at once? What if it was designed to teach? The structure seems to support that. The early layers are simple, basic numerical logic, recognizable sequences. But as the decoding continues, the relationships grow more abstract, more complex, more unfamiliar. It's like starting with arithmetic and slowly moving towards something beyond known mathematics. Almost as if the signal is guiding the observer forward. And that raises a chilling implication. Because guidance implies intent. If something shaped this transmission, then it didn't just embed information randomly. It organized it in a way that anticipates discovery. Step by step. Layer by layer. That's not how natural phenomena behave. That's how communication behaves. Another anomaly makes the situation even more difficult to ignore. The signal doesn't fully resolve. Even with advanced analysis, parts of it remain incomplete, like missing pieces in a much larger system. Sections that hint at deeper layers but don't fully reveal them. At first, that seemed like a limitation of the data. But now, another interpretation is being considered. Those missing pieces might not be missing at all.